Hello and welcome to Narrative Drivetime, where I talk to storytellers about storytelling. If you're in the business of storytelling, or you want to pay attention to this show. Who am I? I'm Craig Colby. I've been producing shows for television for 30 years, storytelling roles all the way through, writer, director, executive producer, all of that stuff. And I have a storytelling company called Colby Vision. And that guy right there is Dave Whyte, one of the best editors in the business, picture editors. You want to know who he is and what he has to say. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Craig. Thanks for having me on.
Very pleased to have you on. I want to just start with one little story. I first met Dave Whyte as an editor in 1999. It was in November of 1999 because we were cutting a Millennium 2-hour special, working from scratch. We had 7 weeks to do it because somehow the Millennium snuck up on us.
Yeah, it snuck up on somebody, and that's 7 weeks, like you said, from scratch inception to broadcast. That's not 7 weeks of editing. That's 7 weeks of.
We edited it in about 3-4 weeks.
Yeah, it was. If that.
Cut right through Christmas, and we both got sick.
Both got sick, yeah.
But it was revealed to me what a great editor Dave is, and what a great guy to work with, and the sweet he is, because we came out of that as friends and not people who wanted to kill each other. At least I'm speaking for myself. I don't want to put words.
I think you wanted to kill me during the thing, but afterwards,
that is not true. That is not true at all. Dave, when did you first get an interest in storytelling?
Well, I mean, it feels like I've always kind of liked story. I mean, growing up as a kid, reading books and stuff like that. But the thing that made me want to be in television and be an editor was I was watching a kids show called Kids Are People Too, and I was 8 years old, and they showed this cool thing called a chroma key, and they put the green screen up and they put a green box, and they had a guy lie down in a Superman outfit, and lo and behold, Superman was flying, and that to me was the coolest thing in the world. So basically that interest just stuck with me from then on, and I was able to take film classes in high school for about 3 years, and then right from there I went to college, Sheridan College in Oakville, and that was one of the college, as is you learn, you do a bit of everything. You do audio, you do video, you do lighting, but obviously editing became the thing that I like to do the most. There's a few reasons for that. One of them is because you don't have to carry stuff. Honestly, I learned very early on that I didn't like lugging all that heavy equipment around. And
it was back when we started, which is a while ago. It was a lot heavier, especially at school, where you had to carry a huge, heavy 3/4-inch tape recorder in addition to the camera.
A gigantic camera that probably weighed 20 pounds. And the separate recorder that probably also weighed about 20 pounds. You're lugging all this stuff around. And imagine the tripod that to hold this thing up. I mean, it was ridiculous. So I was like, no thanks. I'm going to stay in this dark room and make the pretty pictures happen. I just thought it was a lot more fun anyway. It was because you're really crafting something in that room. So,
well, I love the editing process because it's where all the hard work comes together. Before that, it's a lot of strife with glimpses of goodness. You see the pictures, and the pictures look good, and you work on the script. I always, when I write a script, go, boy, this is my chance to blow it. I really hope I don't blow it. All the hard work's been done here. It's my chance to just ruin everything. If the script comes in and it's good, you're happy about that, but it all comes together in the edit suite. And Dave, you don't plan the show, you don't pitch the show, you don't write the show, you don't take the pictures, but you have an important job. What role as a storyteller do you have as an editor?
Well, as you say, I mean, all that stuff has happened ahead of time. But as I like to say, and I've heard before, no plan survives contact with the enemy. So if you've got a brilliant script and you've got a bunch of stuff that's shot, it's like, well, do they really match? Sometimes they don't, right? And inevitably, the story will change a little bit, and often it changes because of the stuff that gets discovered during the editing process, right? So you have to, you're crafting the thing pretty much after the fact, but often you have to, convince someone to write a different line or to, come up with a new concept for a transition or something. But it is the part where, you're putting that final polish on the story. It's like if you're, rebuilding a car, all the body work is done underneath, but that coat of paint is the final thing that makes it look all shiny and new, right? So, and that's basically what we do. I mean, we solve a lot of problems and but we also, bring that vision of the story to life.
Yeah, it's a lot more than a coat of paint. I would actually say it's the assembly line of putting all the pieces together. And you talk about needing extra pictures for the Marvel movies. I think they were the first to actually work in reshoots into their budget and schedule, because they're spending a lot of money. And if you want that shot, you want that shot. And a lot of times, even with your best plans, you learn things about the show when you cut it, especially the first show in a series.
Oh, show number one is always a mess. Like, I mean, all the planning, like you say, all the planning in the world, cannot survive day one on the shoot, right? I mean, you come back and this is where you really figure the stuff out. Episode one, I would say in a 6 or 8 episode run, we'll get it all figured out by episode 7 or episode 9. It's right. Episode one is, you're definitely recreating the whole thing. Like, you've got the plan and you're going to do it, and then things change and executives get involved, and there's all different kinds of influences, and you find out that sometimes either the characters you have or the story you're trying to tell just doesn't come across. So it's time to sort of rethink it and come up with maybe a new idea. So
that's when you become the pit crew. Like,
right.
You put the car together, but when you put it on the track, it's not, this is perfect. That first show is really your pit crewing that the first season. I've done a lot of first seasons of shows, and it ain't pretty. When you get a project, there's script and there's pictures. Where do you start?
Well, I always, I have a look at the script, but really I start with the pictures. I will spend the first day or so going through all the footage that I have, because I want to know in reality what we actually have, right? It's great to have the script say, let's show a shot of that blue ball. And it's like, well, they only shot a green ball. So sometimes you need to know what you have before, and then you're not I feel like that way I'm not pigeonholed into, the script really telling me what's there and what isn't, right? I want to know what's there. And quite frankly, you probably don't want to hear this from me, but a lot of times I'll look at the script once and then ignore it for the rest of the show, because often, if you have the roadmap, where you want to go in general, then it's the stuff that is shot that's going to tell me how to get there. It's not the script that's going to tell me how to get there, right? The script is sort of often a wish list.
Well, not my scripts, buddy. But I am, well aware of what you're saying. The script is actually a starting point. Most of writing is rewriting, and that is certainly true in TV. When you add another layer of picture and sound and another person to it. We both started in the days when television was linear, and that meant you put tapes in this machine, and you had this machine, and the tape would go from here to here. You had 2 of them, so you could roll 2 tapes and put them in. And in those days, and I was working on a daily science news show and sports show before that, you had to have everything planned out. I planned every shot. It wasn't like we were looking. I would grab a tape and put it in over this line. You do it. You planned every shot. That changed with nonlinear editing. And for me, it changed when I wrote this beautiful opening to a show on Point Pelee and put out every shots, and I saw the editor didn't use any of them. So I just started putting in suggestions for where things are.
Yeah.
So at what point do you find that the script and the pictures start working together for you?
Well, when do they start working together? Well, I mean, obviously, if someone has gone to the trouble, like you have in those days, and I know
Like
you
I
still
did.
do that now. Yeah, like you did. No, you still do it now too.
Yeah,
The idea of writing to picture or with picture, right? So you're writing your script and your story based on the footage that you actually do have, not based on the stuff you hope you got or think you got. When they merge together and you've got the support, the pictures and the sound that actually support the narrative that you're trying to tell, that's it's great at that point. It's a symphony at that point. I mean, you're really, things are gelling well. That I think is the best.
when do you want someone to tell you what picture to use?
Almost never. Almost never. But obviously, if a director or a producer has a specific thing in mind, they need to communicate that. Otherwise, I'm going to interpret things differently. I'm going to interpret things the way I see things, and often that works out well. Often, they come in and are like, "Oh, I didn't think of that," or "I didn't see it that way," and I like the way you've done that. Or they go, "Why is the shot of the pineapple there? That's it's supposed to be a watermelon." I was like, "Oh, okay, well, if you had told me that, I'd have put it." So obviously, when there's a specific need for shots, especially if it's something complicated that you really need the right pictures to tell that story, whatever it is. If it's a technical thing, then definitely that's when you want specific guidelines about what shots to use when. But other than that, I mean, if it's if we're talking about things looking good and looking pretty, it's like that. I can usually handle that.
You can. One of the best. When do you want feedback?
When do I want feedback? I like to do a full cut myself first. If there's, like I said, if there's specific instructions for specific things, fine. But I like to go through and have a good crack at it on my own without any interruption. And then after then I can, because that way I understand what I've got from a story point of view, and then that's a good point for feedback to come in. And the good feedback is good, and bad feedback is bad. Feedback I like is specific, and I think everyone would agree that vague feedback is the worst kind of feedback.
Yeah, vague feedback is somebody looking for a place to hide.
You know what? Or justifying their existence. I mean, in some cases, it's like I'm not sure I like the music. It's like, well, do you like the music or you don't like the music? And if you don't,
Right. And
what
is
kind
it
of music would
don't
you like? What don't you like about it? Like, help me out here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, yeah, those kinds of vagaries are always a pain because you don't really know what direction to go in. I mean, I need, if we're trying to craft your story, then I need some direction from you. But it's not easy when it's, this sort of, I'll know it when I see it. You know what I mean? It's like, well.
Oh, yeah, that's expensive.
Yeah.
That's an expensive way to do
Yep,
things.
absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying about feedback. You actually want a chance to work with it. If somebody gets to it, well, there's a director I worked with, a studio director, and we used to craft things in the suite. And he would be working on something and say, "I don't like that." He said, "You know what? I'm just going to put a curtain in front of the playback monitor.
Yeah.
And when it's done, I'll pull open the curtain and then you can look at it."
Yeah, right. I mean, I had a producer one time, a guy I worked for, my first job out of school, and we had, as you're saying, the old days, a tape suite, so very, linear with two machines and all that. And I would be queuing up an edit, and he would yell at me from another room, saying that edit's too tight. I'm like, I'm not even.
I haven't made it yet.
Can you let me actually make the edit before you decide whether it's too tight or not?
Looking into the future.
Yeah, well, right. Crazy.
What are some of the unusual challenges you can run into when you're cutting a show?
What are, all of them. I mean, everything from terrible footage to terrible audio to writers who don't know what they're doing. And I mean, all that, I feel like all that technical stuff can be overcome one way or another. I think the big problem comes when you have, different I don't know, bosses or executives or whatever that have, that have two completely different opinions about how the show should go. So, now you're in a situation where you're doing a cut for one person, and then they change it, and you do a cut for the other person, and they change, and then they're butting heads all the time. I mean, this is the worst situation you could possibly be in. I mean, challenges from, like I said, from a technical point of view are it can be overcome one way or another. But it's the personality conflicts, I think, that give you the most trouble.
I worked on a show where we had an executive give notes on the rough cut, and then a different executive gave notes on the fine cut, and then it would, on top of the other person's notes, and then another person would give notes on top of that, which is, well, I mean, mostly it's annoying, but mostly it's expensive.
Yeah, well,
and when I worked on a project at Love Nature with Smithsonian Channel, one of the systems that we worked out together was you would have, on some shows, I would have the lead, and on some shows, the other one would have the lead. And you would basically send your notes to them, or she would send them to me, and then I would compile the notes. And sometimes I would ignore theirs, sometimes they would ignore mine, but at least only one set of notes came in, and we got the best feedback from our production partners about how easy that made their jobs. And because nobody wants to waste money, it's also less expensive. One of the things we talked about in the pre-interview that I wanted to get to was one of the biggest challenges was when you are requested to edit around what was originally shot as the focal point in the first place.
Yeah.
Can you tell me what that's like?
That is, I mean, there's nothing worse. The plan is, we're going to shoot this thing, we're going to shoot this blue ball, and the blue ball is the greatest thing ever invented, and the story is totally about the blue ball. And then, of course, you do the thing, and it looks great. And then someone comes along and says, you know what? We can't show the blue ball. We can never show the blue ball. It's like, but I thought we cleared the blue ball. Didn't we clear the blue? Doesn't matter. We can't ever show the blue ball. So now, I mean, I just did this recently with a sponsor in a show that, the sponsor logo, it's totally fine to have it in there. It's totally fine to have them mention it. And then, by the way, we need to do it where they don't mention it, where we never see the logo. I mean, they're covered. The boxes are covered in this giant logo, and it's like okay, but they're all in the center of the frame. It's like, yeah, I know, but we can't show it. It's like, okay, well, I don't. This is a time where creativity and craftsmanship come in. You're doing things that you never thought would be possible. And I spent hours one day, doing blurs, even blurring a shadow because the flap of the box was moving, and all kinds of stuff just to eliminate the thing that was intentionally shot in the first place. I don't know how that happens. I'm glad I'm not in those conversations because I think I would go crazy.
Yeah, I have been, and it does drive you crazy.
Yeah.
And, I've been in conversations where a show's half shot and people say, well, no, we need it to be funny now. Funny is trending. Make the show funny. Well, we didn't shoot funny.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to give you one example that you talked about, just to give people listening an idea of what it really is. Because the day we did that pre-interview and the day you mentioned that, I was watching a show with my wife. It was a show about this doctor who was helping a young man with his really bad acne. And they walked through the show. They did these different processes. One, they put gold on his face. I know they could have done something else. I know that was for TV. But it came to the big reveal at the end, and they had two different shots for it. One was very backlit, him coming out of the light, couldn't see it very well. And there was another one where it was very clear. He was in front of a mirror. He was wearing the same clothes. I think he'd had a haircut between them. And my wife looked at it and said, he's got makeup on. And it was obvious that he did. He had makeup on. The acne was improved, but you couldn't see any discoloration. And I had noticed in one of the earlier shots that as he was coming out of the light, you could see his skin a little bit, and it was much better, but there was a little discoloration. I said to Nancy, I'm going to show you what happened. Back that up. We looked at it. As soon as you saw the discoloration, I said, somebody, an executive producer or a production executive, the producer, whoever, somebody looked at that and said, his skin hasn't improved enough. You have to make it look better. So shoot another day with this young man and cover him with makeup.
Yeah. And just, you know what, it doesn't matter what the show ends up looking like, as long as, we feel that we've covered the thing the way we want, right? I mean, I know it's and like you're saying, it's not true, right? I mean, you're
Yeah.
kind of making this thing that isn't true anymore, and that to me is.
And the thing is, he'd improved dramatically.
Yeah.
They had done an amazing job on it. What the problem really was the shoot schedule.
Yeah.
They didn't have enough days to shoot the full improvement.
Yeah.
So they ended up, well, I think they lied to the audience.
I think one of the things I find with all this stuff, with the television in general, and is that I think we in the industry have a tendency to either underestimate or overestimate our audience, right? I think we underestimate them in their intelligence and like how their ability to understand or conceptualize something we're telling them. But also I think we overestimate their ability to see, mistakes or glitches or things that we would find, just appalling. Most people don't even notice, right? So I think there's, and they're only going to see it once. Like it's going to fly by. That one shot that it maybe isn't so great is, they're not going to notice it because it's going to go by into 1 second, and they won't notice, but we all notice.
Well,
so I think
this was the blue ball in the middle. They were going to notice this. They just didn't like what the blue ball looked like.
True. Yeah.
What is it like when a show is really clicking? What are the characteristics of a show that really clicks from an editor's point of view?
Oh, tons of footage. I mean, tons of really good, beautiful footage. This is our dream. This is heaven for us, right? You've got good, snappy writing, and you've got footage coming out of your ears that an abundance of choice. I mean, well, on one hand, it can make things more difficult because when somebody says, "Do we have better shots of this?" you can. Well, maybe
we have way better shots that we chose not to use.
Well, yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, we probably don't have better shots. We have different shots, right? One of the notes that drives every editor crazy are, do we have any better shots of? And it's like, no, none. We don't have any good shots at all. I kept all those separate, and I didn't use any of the good shots. But I think, once you've got something that flows really well, when the story's flowing and the pictures are working and everything cuts together nice and smooth and seamlessly, it's the best thing, right? I mean,
and what does a good editor bring to the storytelling?
I think a good editor brings the ability to. I want to say the ability to tell the producers and the writers when things are not working. That because we can see the story as well, right? I mean, sometimes we don't. I feel like sometimes by some people in the industry, we don't get the credit for understanding story flow. Sometimes we do. Plenty of people you work with that totally appreciate that ability, but I think a lot of times sometimes you get the feeling that it's really about pictures, make the sound louder, make it lower, whatever, that stuff. But I think the ability to tell when a story is not working, and offer ways to fix it. I mean, this happens regularly. Although it did happen most glaringly recently in a show I was doing. We're under a lot of pressure to get the show done, and there's scenes that have, it was a renovation style show. So there was scenes that have process, right? A room is empty and then it's filled with stuff, and, painting has happened and construction has happened. And I kind of was going at a pace a bit too fast, and I kind of messed up, one of the scenes, and I didn't really understand what the problem was until I looked at it afterwards with their feedback, and I was like, oh, I see what's happening now. The flow is wrong. Like it was just wrong. And then, so once you can kind of, get around that, and you have in your head how the thing is supposed to flow together, you're flying at that point. Right. So I think, it's that ability to see when flow isn't working, and when it is, I guess, on the other side of it.
Well, you talk about the editor as a storyteller, and being trusted and things like that. This is going to be a bad segue. In my early days, as a function of time, you would sit in with the editor all the time. It moved to a process where you left the editor alone as much as possible. And you actually looked for editors who didn't want you around. It was cheaper to do it that way.
Yeah.
And it made sense, right?
Yeah.
I don't need to tell you how to do every little thing.
Right.
There is a role that's a story editor. I've been my own story editor for a long time. The last little while I've worked as a story editor because I'm a freelancer and there's more work as story editor than there is for a producer, things like that. That's a great way to learn new things. Yeah. If you haven't produced a type of show, you can come on as a story editor and still use your skills and, figure out the nuts and bolts of that kind of programming. But one of the things I found as a story editor, after being an executive producer and a producer, is you have lost a lot of your ability to dictate decision-making.
Right.
As an executive producer, you say it happens, it's going to happen. Yeah. As a producer, you say it's going to happen, and it's going to happen until an executive producer or production executive says, don't do that. As a story editor, you go in and say, I think this should happen, and maybe it happens.
Yeah,
maybe sometimes. What, from your perspective, is it's a great lesson in negotiating. Actually, it's a good place to be.
Yeah.
What do you see as a good working relationship between a story editor, and for people who don't know, a story editor just comes in and works on the script and the story with instructions from the producer and stays with the show usually after script writing. Yes. Works with the editor through the producer. What do you think is a good working relationship between a story editor and an editor?
Definitely one where you can collaborate, right? And I think a story editor that knows when to not say something, or when again, like I said earlier, the idea of pictures and music and all these kinds of things, that's kind of my job, right? So if a story editor gives me notes about music choices or how an edit's working or these kinds of things, I'm kind of that's not really I'll take care of that. Don't worry about that stuff, right? So if you can work collaboratively with someone. See, I would have edited that word out. But anyway, if you can,
I'm not doing any editing today. No, that's not my job.
I do this all in my head all the time. Every time I hear somebody talk, I'm editing what they're saying. But anyway, the story editor has the unfortunate job of being the go-between between the producers, etc., and the editor. And sometimes, I think that has to work both ways. Like the editor has to respect the role of the story editor, who is trying to, it's more of a big picture for them, right? They're looking at the whole arc of the show and potentially the series. And in some situations, if you're only working on a segment for a show, you might not even understand what's going on in the rest of the show or rest of the episode. So it really does rely on them to craft the overall arc. And if you can work within that and not feel offended that they want to change a few lines, or that not use those shots because we need to use them elsewhere, egos have to be set aside, generally speaking, when you're in a tight situation, working relationship like that. But on the other hand, the story editor also does have to respect what the editor is capable of and what the editor's job is, and not to interfere with, like I think we talked about before, about nickel and diming me on things, right?
Yes, the very first advice I was given on the very first day in television, so I took something into an editor, and he said, "It's your first day, right?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Don't nickel and dime me." I thought that was really good advice.
It is great advice.
Yeah, and it's across. You don't need to win everything, and you have to let people own things. Yeah. Well, first of all, because they may be better at it than you. Right?
It's possible,
right? You got to consider that. Yeah. And also, even in higher roles that I've had, let people own some of it so that they'll love it and they'll put all of themselves into it. Yeah. But in the story editor relationship, I mean, you really have to. I have found it works best when you can suggest things to the other person, but that that's their job to do that. I'll write the script.
Yeah.
Right. That's what I do. You can tell me you don't like this line. You can suggest a line, but if I rewrite it and I can say, I don't think that cut's working, but ultimately we know that that's not the story editor's call. That's going to be the producer's call, or the production executive at the network's call.
Yeah, it's one of those funny things because, if I'm going to send out a cut, on a Vimeo link or something like that for an executive to see, I always feel like that's my work that I'm putting out there. So, I want to make sure that all the stuff is in there that I agree with. Right now, that doesn't necessarily mean that, I'm going to totally disagree with the story editor on all fronts. But what it does mean is there are times where I'm going to take some, control over certain aspects. And if I disagree with a cut or I disagree with a whatever, I'm the one putting it out there. I'm the one delivering it. So I feel like certain things are my, under my roof. So
yeah,
I'm gonna make sure that they're as good as I want them. But I think also that, like we're talking about feedback and we're talking about working with a story editor, I think if a story editor says to me, this section isn't working because they have a specific reason it's not working, and then leave me to fix it, right? I think that can work really well because you've got the point across that it's not working the way we want it to work. But you're not also nickel and diming me on, let's try this shot or let's try that shot or cut it 5 frames earlier or whatever, give me the suggestion. Like you say, give me the suggestion and let's, let me do and rework it, see if I can make it work for you. Right. Yeah. I'm always trying to please people. This is basically my job is make everybody happy, right? Make the story editor, the producer, the executive, the other executive, make all them happy. Right.
We're going to talk about that in 1 second.
Yeah.
But I think the point you're making on editor and story editor are, look, a good story editor and editor can be Starsky and Hutch, or they can be Rocky and Apollo Creed.
Yes,
exactly. It really depends on how you get along.
Yeah.
Well, I've had a few Rocky Apollo ones, but in the end, Rocky and Apollo are friends. You just have to realize that it's
exactly
work and you're finding a way to work
I
together.
totally see where you're going with that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I find almost always, even if it's Rocky at the start, I've gotten along great with basically almost everyone I've worked with. So.
Yeah, you're clearly one of the best, and you're very able to speak your mind in a way that can be forceful at times, but is always about the work and never about the people. We talked earlier about some of the unofficial roles of an editor. One in particular. What are some of the unofficial roles, or at least one unofficial role an editor takes on during the production process?
Unofficial psychiatrist, bartender. The amount of stories I've heard over the years of people's personal lives and, husbands and wives and children and, the phone calls that people take in the edit suite and you're listening and you're like, wow, I cannot believe she's yelling at her kid right now. But I find in a way though, that actually, especially if if you're having conversations with the person you're working with and they're on a personal level, you have a tendency to end up working together even better because you're getting to know each other really well and you're sharing things about each other and you become comfortable. And that way, when you get notes that you don't necessarily agree with, you don't fight about it. It becomes very collaborative that way because you're comfortable talking to each other and talking through the issues and talking through the problems. But yeah, like I said, the stuff you overhear in these suites sometimes is.
Well, the online suite, when I worked at High Fidelity HD TV, was unofficially called the confessional.
Right.
Because things came out in there that
the other one, you're a priest as
well. Surprised me.
Oh man.
I think part of that is there's two functions of that. One is that you are stuck in this room and that's where you are.
Yeah.
And the second is you are at the point in the production where I'll forget about the personal stuff, but certainly the production stuff. The tensions have had a chance to accumulate. And even on the best shows, there's tensions because you have limits and resources and time and aspirations. So it gets to the point where, especially late in the production, there's an accumulation of them and the producer or the writer or the story editor comes in and sits down and
it's gossip time. I mean,
well, it opens up. It's the outlet.
It comes out. It definitely, it's got got to go somewhere, right? It's going to come out somewhere, for sure. All the problems with, on set and in the writer's room and wherever. I mean, yeah, we always hear about it in the edit suite.
You get to know people.
Yeah.
What's the best part of the job?
The best part of the job, I think the job to me feels very, very creative, and also not. Like it's kind of it's a creative job, but I don't have to actually, I don't have to light anything. I don't have to draw anything. I'm not the one that has to, frame the shots to make them look really pretty. I complain about them a lot, but I don't actually have to do that stuff. So it's very creative without actually having to make the pictures and make the sound, So for me, it's just the process of cutting 3 shots together that make a perfect little sequence, and it makes perfect sense, and it just works, and that to me is just it's what I like about it. I mean, my favorite thing in the world is to do tell a story with no words. Like that's really, I know you can get with a photograph, say, but to put a series of shots together that tell their own story, and you've cut them in such a way that it makes sense, and you've used the right angles, and you've used the right coverage, and it makes perfect sense, and you don't have to say a thing, right? That to me that's great. I mean, that to me that's one of the best things.
And you are one of the very best at that. I always love working with you. And thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on editing and television. I hope we didn't complain too much about the back end of this during the story, but it really is a beautiful part of the process. And as someone who's involved on most of the shows I've worked on from stem to stern, when it comes into the edit suite and you pull it all together, there's only really a moment at the end when it's all together that it becomes the butterfly. And that it really is a beautiful moment where you've seen all the labor and all the efforts, and it becomes this show. It's a great thing.
When you've combined all the elements, when you've combined the perfect footage and great writing and music that is, that just hits it just right, it's a beautiful thing. It is wonderful. Yeah.
It's a really fun part of the process. I love being in the edit suite.
Well, me too. I mean it all day, every day. So
good to hear. It's good to hear. David,
Greg,
thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. I hope people watching it got something out of it. I certainly do. I learned something from every single one of these. And thank you very much for being on Narrative Drive Time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Are you a storyteller who wants to tell the story of how you tell stories? Yes? Then I want to hear from you. Drop me a line at craig@colbyvision.net and tell me a little bit about yourself, your career, and some of the particulars of your process. Colby Vision is a storytelling company working in the broadcasting and the business world. Send me an email if you need help with either. Thanks to Tim Vesely for the music, and Kevin Francisco for the graphics, and Dave Whyte for the editing. And thanks to you for watching Narrative Drive Time.